Well, hello again. We are on to chapter 6, which is our third chapter in module 2. And this chapter should be very interesting for all of you because it deals with a topic that is very controversial, but also one that is very relevant in any type of people management, and that is the topic of motivation. Motivation, and in this chapter, we're going to talk about the different perspectives on motivation, whether they be a need or individual characteristic perspective, whether they focus more on job design or whether they focus on the interrelationship between both. And then we're also going to look at a very important affective component or an emotion, which is job satisfaction, and how that is in fact related to some aspects of motivation and how that in fact influences some of the organizational outcomes that we see from people's behavior. So hopefully this chapter will be very interesting because we all kind of want to know how to motivate, and we also want to know what explains when we are motivated or when we are not motivated. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have a good chapter. Before we can discuss the implications of motivation, we must define it. And motivation here is defined as a psychological process. So understand this is something that occurs within the individual. And this psychological process, it causes some type of arousal, listen to this, direction, and persistence of voluntary action. So it initiates some movement within me. It kind of gets me going. It directs me in terms of where I should place my energy in terms of some kind of activity. And it also promotes some type of commitment to the task. So think about when you're motivated to do something. It gets you going. It starts you up. It energizes you. It also focuses your attention and your resources on what has to be done, and then the persistence. I remember, recently I was cutting my grass, I was doing my lawn, and I was trying to fix this weed whacker, this weed cutter. I have really limited skills when it comes to fixing these things, but I was determined to do so. I was aroused, first of all, I was really motivated. So I was aroused, I was energized to do it. I knew where I wanted to be. I kind of, let everything go away, and I focused directly on doing that. And thirdly, I had to stay committed. I was persistent. It took a long time, but because I was motivated to see it completed, to repair this thing, to actually accomplish my goal, then I continued to do it regardless of how many times I failed. So that's what you see in motivation. This model is uh, a very good illustration, I should say, of how motivation occurs and some of the factors or some of the antecedents of motivation as well as some of the outcomes. We see here that motivation, employee engagement, is a result of both personal factors and factors within the environment, within the context. So we have to take both into consideration when we are trying to understand why people are motivated. It's, of course, many times something to do with what's inside of them, like their personality, their ability, their core self-evaluation, things that we talked about in chapter 4, but it also has to do with the context, with the environment, things like the culture of the organization, things like the job design that we're going to talk a bit more today. And so all of those factors, whether they be in the environment or whether they be in the individual, they contribute to this psychological arousal, persistence, and direction, which is what we have classified as motivation. And look closely here. This motivation leads to behaviors and outcomes at the individual, group, and organizational level. And interestingly, the behavior can be positive, or the outcomes could be positive, as well as they can be negative. So if we are motivated effectively, we will see these beneficial results, but if we aren't, we will see some negative results. Well, before we focus on the contextual factors, we'll first look at the individual factors that influence and have implications for motivation. And a lot of research in terms of the individual factors that focus on what we call the need theories of motivation. And what are needs? Well, here they're defined as physiological or psychological deficiencies that arouse behavior. What that tends to suggest is that we are normally aroused, meaning that our psychological process that begins motivation occurs most often when there is some type of deficiency, when we're missing something, when we're uncomfortable about something, and therefore we want to change something. So whenever there is some need, wherever there is some lack, we will be motivated to correct that, to amend that, and that leads to some type of motivation psychological process that then has the behavioral outcomes that you saw in the model before. So just think about when you've been motivated. For example, you're driving your car and there's no gas in your car. You're very motivated to find you a gas station. You're hungry. You're motivated to find something to eat. You're aroused. You're going to go there. All your attention is going to be about getting something to eat or finding that gas station. And then you're going to stay persistent. If you didn't find it the first time, you're going to continue because you realize you need to fulfill that need. Well, a very, very popular and famous need theory was one created by a guy called Abraham Maslow. I'm pretty certain that you've heard this before, especially if you've taken principles of management, which I think all of you have. And Maslow argues that motivation is a function of these five basic needs that all individuals have: physiological, safety, love, esteem, and self-actualization. He actually sees those needs as a hierarchy, meaning that at the very bottom, our basic need is for some kind of physiological, having health and well-being, if you will. Once we have achieved that, once we can survive, once we have food, then we look to try to be safe. We then try to establish love, relationships. We then look for some esteem that will be recognized, and then our self-actualization. And he argues that these human needs emerge in a predictable stair-step fashion. Well, research has kind of debunked some of this, some of Maslow's theory, but what's one thing that we've taken from it is the fact that if needs have already been met, then they're not likely to be or continue to be motivated. Just think about this. If you have already eaten and you're no longer hungry, if somebody comes to you and say, you know what, can you go fix my tire? I'll give you an apple pie. You probably are not going to be motivated to do that because the reward that you're receiving is not going to meet some need that you still have. You're full, so you don't have any need for food anymore. So once a need has been met, it rarely ever becomes a motivating factor. Along with Maslow's need theory, we have McClelland's need theory. And McClelland identified three main needs that individuals have. A need for achievement, that's where you want to accomplish something difficult, something challenging. A need for affiliation, where he says, you want to spend more time, you're more of a people person, so you want to be more in terms of, you want to spend more resource and more time in terms of cultivating and sustaining relationships. And this need for power, which is a desire to influence, coach, teach, encourage, to really kind of, be a leader, if you will. And McClelland says obviously people differ in terms of how important or how much they prioritize each one of these needs. Some people are high on need for achievement. They really want to get things done. They want to, they want to be accomplished and they want to be rewarded for that. Some people, as I said before, are more people oriented. They find a need to build these relationships. And then some people really want to influence. And a need for power is not just a need to be a dictator, a need to be a controller, but really a need to be a social leader, a need to give back and to be able to lead so that it can bring about the social good. Having looked at those two important need theories, and as I said, those focus more on the individual factors, we now turn our attention to the contextual factors. How does the environment and things within the context of the organization affect the individual's motivation level? And so researchers have looked at how an aspect of the context, of the contextual environment, job design, can actually play a part and the effect it can have on a member of the organization, employees' motivation level. So job design, what is it? It says here it's any set of activities that involve alteration of specific jobs or interdependent systems of jobs with the intent of improving the quality of employee job experience and thereon the job productivity. Well, what does that really mean? Essentially, in job design, I'm trying to craft your job, your roles, your task in such a way that it's going to bring you a greater level of arousal, direction, and persistence. So I'm trying to do something to your job, to the tasks and the activities, whatever that you are responsible for, in such a way that it increases your motivation level positively and leads to positive outcomes. So in job design, I'm really, seeking ways to change the context so that it can lead to motivation. Often when we talk about job design, we focus on this top-down approach. This is essentially where managers put themselves in a position to actually change the employee's job. So it's coming from the higher level, this job design is coming from the higher levels of the organization. Managers are actually themselves crafting, changing, amending, adapting jobs so that they can hopefully improve the motivational level of the employees. One approach to top-down job design is scientific management. Scientific management, we're really trying to be very research-oriented, very objective in the way that we design our job. So we're looking at experiments, we're looking at doing the type of systematic evaluation and observation that will lead us to be very clear, very scientific in terms of how we design our jobs. So we're trying to break, for example, tasks down into to many different areas and trying to analyze each area to, one, promote efficiency, but also to hopefully, again, increase the motivational level. So scientific management is really kind of about just getting it right from a very logical, systematic approach. While scientific management can actually increase efficiency, it can, however, unfortunately lead to boredom, it can lead to repetition, and it's something that does not motivate an employee. Top-down approaches, things that have been used obviously to try to improve motivational levels is something first called job enlargement. You might have seen this before, you might have actually experienced this before, and that's where organizations, managers try to put more variety into a job. We call that horizontal loading. So for example, let's say you're a professor and you're teaching classes. Well, what your boss might do, my chair might do, is might say, you know what, I also want you to start working on a project, on a student learning project, whereby we are able to mentor our students, or we match students with mentoring. That is, now I'm not only just a teacher, I'm not only in the classroom, but I'm also doing this thing in terms of interacting with students, or improving student development. That's horizontal loading. Okay, I've enlarged my job, I've given it more variety. Well, what is job rotation? Well, in job rotation, you actually are moving an employee from one specialized job to another. And the reason that you're doing that, let's say you were working in marketing this year, now we're moving you to operations, is to allow the employee to kind of get a fuller, more holistic understanding of the organization, but also to more importantly stimulate interest and motivation. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you'll find yourself perhaps getting bored, getting disinterested. When you open yourself up to this new experience, it kind of stimulates you and it improves your motivation level. Another famous theory that has to do with job design and the top-down approach is Herzberg's motivation hygiene model. And in this model, Herzberg actually distinguishes between two types of factors that he believes has some kind of impact on an employee's level of motivation, what he calls satisfaction and dissatisfaction. In fact, he distinguishes between the two. He says that dissatisfaction is not the opposite of satisfaction, or vice versa. They're actually two different constructs. And his argument was this, that if you change essentially the contextual factors, if you change for things with about the environment, the reward system, you change the actual general environment, you change who people are working with, those things won't necessarily lead to increased satisfaction by employees. They will just lead to less dissatisfaction. So if you change the environment, what you're actually going to do is to reduce the level of dissatisfaction. Herzberg says in order to motivate employees, what you actually have to do is to change the content of the job. You have to change what they're doing. You have to change the type of autonomy that they have, the amount of responsibility. You have to give them greater variety, offer them the opportunity to achieve things and be recognized. That actually leads to motivation, and that leads to increased satisfaction. So as I said before, as Herzberg argued, the motivators are really the characteristics associated with job satisfaction. That has to do with really the content of the job. What are you doing? What does it allow you to achieve in terms of recognition and rewards and esteem, and gives you that level of responsibility. It gives you essentially some challenge. The hygiene factors are really about the context, things like your salary, who are you working with, your supervisors, the working conditions, as I said, they can only lead to lower dissatisfaction. And oftentimes, unfortunately, as managers, we try to motivate, or managers try to motivate employees by changing the environment. They try to, give them more money, make, make their working conditions better, and that might help. But all it does is decrease the level of dissatisfaction, not necessarily increase the level of satisfaction and increase the level of motivation that Herzberg argues is necessary to bring about those performance levels that you require. So you have to really understand it has to do with, according to Herzberg, the job, and changing the job is going to help the organization and help the employee be motivated. And implicit in Herzberg's argument is, of course, then that you cannot just improve motivation by giving people more things to do, and that's called vertical loading. What you actually have to do is to horizontally load, give them more variety, give them more of a challenge in terms of their job, and that leads to a greater level of motivation. And this really leads us into considering enriching jobs rather than just kind of increasing the load of jobs. And in job enrichment, what we're doing is we're modifying, right? We're crafting a job in such a way that the employee has the opportunity to experience the things that Herzberg said are motivators, like achievement, recognition, stimulating work, responsibility, and advancement. In that way, the organization is creating an atmosphere, if you will, to improve the motivational level of the employee. Because now, as an employee, I have that chance to really see myself as being important, to see myself as contributing, to see myself as excelling, and that's going to lead to motivation. That's going to wake me up in the morning and get me fired up about what I do. If I feel, especially if I'm, in careers that I've chosen, that are supposed to challenge me, that are supposed to give me opportunities to excel, and I am not having those opportunities, I'm going to feel frustrated. And so that job enrichment is going to lead most times to the motivating level that organizations require of the employees in order to perform at the levels that they require. Along with scientific management, job enlargement, job rotation, and job enrichment is a fourth top-down approach to job design. And it's a job characteristics model, and it kind of builds on what we just talked about in terms of job enrichment. In this model, Hackham and Olden, two OB researchers, said basically what Herzberg said, that if you increase the enrichment of a job, if you change the content of a job in such a way that you build upon an employee's ability to be recognized, to be rewarded, to be challenged, give them those opportunities within the content of the job, it's going to lead to arousal in certain psychological states. It's going to make them want to work, which is then going to lead to some positive outcomes. And essentially what they're talking about here is, again, changing a job, designing a job in such a way that it provides the individual with the opportunity to feel as if they want to work. And then in that case, once they feel as if they want to work, once they're challenged, they are then going to be motivated to work, and it's going to lead to the outcomes that both the employee and the organization require. A central theme in their work in the job characteristic model is this concept of intrinsic motivation. It says here it's occurring when an individual is turned on to one's work because of the positive internal feelings that are generated by doing well, rather than being dependent on external factors such as incentive, pay, or compliments from the boss. You might have had a situation where you're doing something. You might be working in a certain organization right now. You might be doing a specific task. And if I asked you, well, why do you do that? You might say, in all earnest, I'm doing it because I want to do it. It's something that I really like to do. But what that shows me, or that is demonstrating to me, is that you're intrinsically motivated. You're not doing this necessarily because of what you're being paid, or you're not doing this because you like your boss. None of these things in the external environment is really playing a major role in your arousal, your direction, and your persistence. No, what's really happening here is that internally you're doing this because you get these positive feelings by doing your job and by doing it well. You can then be said to be intrinsically motivated. And that's really the central theme of the job characteristic model. Hackam and Oldham are saying that these characteristics, these job design characteristics I'm going to show you, if they are met, if they are included in the job, that it's going to more likely lead to intrinsic motivation. People are then going to be want to work because they desire those positive feelings, and it's going to lead to positive outcomes. Well, what are these characteristics that Hackam and Nolan argue that must be designed or crafted in a job in order to increase this intrinsic motivation? Well, there are five. The first is skill variety, and that talks about the different tasks that I'm asked to do, the different knowledge or the different requirements of my job. And this greater variety allows me to feel like I'm being challenged, and also perhaps reduces the level of boredom or disinterest I may have. I have an interesting job. Task identity. This allows me to actually be responsible for a very specific, and discernible task, meaning that I can see it from the beginning to the end, and you can clearly see, or I can clearly see, what I have accomplished. Task significance. It means that I believe what I'm doing is actually contributing to something of worth, and so there is some kind of significance in my activity. Autonomy, meaning that I feel that I have some measure of control, some measure of responsibility over my task. I'm not just being directed, it's not just being demanded of me. I have some type of control over what I'm doing. And feedback, of course, has to do with the extent to which I'm receiving direct and clear information about how I'm doing a job. I am being told whether or not I'm doing it correctly or incorrectly, and this feedback is allowing me to be able to better my performance in the future. Well, having looked at both the need theories as well as the job design theories and their implications of motivation, we now look at a very, very common um, outcome that we expect from from motivation, and that is job satisfaction. And what is it? It's an effective or emotional response towards various facets of one's job. It's a very interesting definition because, one, it tells us that job satisfaction is in fact an emotion. If you remember when we talked in chapter 5, we spoke about the importance of emotions and understanding emotion in terms of emotional intelligence. Job satisfaction is a very, very important emotion in terms of organizational behavior. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is that it says that it's towards various facets of one's job. And so what that says is that as individuals, we're likely to kind of compartmentalize or to disaggregate our job into these different facets. And so we might be satisfied with one aspect of it and may not necessarily be satisfied with another. So if you ask me, I might say, you know what, I'm pretty satisfied with what I'm getting paid in my job, but I don't think I'm very satisfied in terms of some of the tasks that they ask me to do, or the level of homogeneity between my tasks. I like probably some more variety. So we can actually break our tasks up. So when we ask us if you're satisfied in your job, it's very difficult to kind of give a general answer because we're looking at maybe various facets. Well, what causes job satisfaction? And you'll see in these answers or these factors, they are very closely aligned to what we just spoke about in terms of what motivates us. First of all, it's need fulfillment. And it says the extent to which a characteristic of a job allow an individual to fulfill his or her needs. So I'm likely to be satisfied in my job if it is fulfilling some or all of my needs. For example, I need, money to survive. I may need recognition. I may need, social relationships. If I'm getting those needs fulfilled in my job, then I'm likely to be satisfied. Discrepancies. And what is that? Satisfaction is a result of met expectations. So this is what I signed up for. This is kind of what I thought this job would be. And when I actually am doing it, this is what I'm seeing. It's meeting my expectations. I'm not getting shortchanged. And if I am getting shortchanged, if I signed up for one thing and then you're asking me to do something completely different, that discrepancy is likely to lead to me not, being satisfied. What is value attainment? It says the extent to which a job allows fulfillment of some work value. So I might have a work value that says I really emphasize productivity, or I emphasize a challenging environment. That's a value of mine. And so because my job allows me to fulfill those values, then I can feel satisfied because I feel, I'm being highly productive here, or I'm being challenged in what I do. And if that's something that I highly value, it's going to leave me sad. I can also say, I might value working great, strong social relationships with my colleagues. And if I am fulfilling those, that will also lead to job satisfaction. The other two causes of job satisfaction, one has to do with equity, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in chapter 7, but it's a function of how fairly an individual is treated at work. And this fairly concept, or how fairly I'm treated, is really all about my perception, going back to chapter 4. Do I perceive myself as being fairly treated? And then the last cause of job satisfaction we're going to look at is this dispositional or genetic component. We argue that some people, because of their personality, because of their physiological makeup even, they might be just more predisposed to being satisfied. There's some people that just kind of seem always content no matter what's going on. It could be a really bad situation. They're like, hey, yeah, I'm happy. I'm doing okay with this. And it may just be because of their personality. Remember, we talked about things like emotional stability in our personality chapter, and so that can actually play a part in terms of job satisfaction. We're going to lastly look at the correlates of job satisfaction. Essentially, how is job satisfaction linked to some of these variables that we've spoken about and we will speak about in this class? Look at the very first one, motivation, and you see that there's a positive and moderate relationship between motivation and job satisfaction. That tends to make sense. As we argued before, if we feel that we're satisfied, our needs, for example, are being met, that we are being challenged, that we have the opportunity to attain our values, all of those things, then we're likely to be motivated, and so there should be some relationship between job satisfaction and motivation. Let's look at organizational commitment. And that speaks to the identity, or how much do we identify with the organization, as well as how much are we, or how willing are we to pursue their goals. There is also a positive and moderate relationship there, meaning that if I am feeling satisfied in my job, I'm more likely to stay with my organization and actually pursue the strategies or the policies that they are requiring of me. A very interesting relationship is the one at the bottom. That deals with job performance. This is obviously very controversial because for many years it seemed intuitively appealing to say that happy workers were productive workers. That isn't necessarily the case, and although recent evidence has found some recent research, I should say, has found some evidence to support this, there is still some controversy of whether or not I'm satisfied because I perform well, or whether satisfaction in fact leads to better performance. So that is still